everyone, welcome to 1.5 Degrees, the podcast where together we explore the science, solutions, and stories involved in the fight against climate change. I'm your host, Heidi Pan, speaking with the professionals behind the latest research, policies, culture, and innovations shaping our response to global environmental challenges. For today's episode, we are joined by Dr. Christine Wiedinmyer, who is the Associate Director for Science at the Cooperative Institute for Research in Environmental Sciences at the University of Colorado Boulder, to discuss the impacts of the Canadian wildfires and her research on emission sources, the transport and fate of pollutants in the atmosphere, and the ways in which climate, technology, and policy impact air quality. She was recognized as the 2014 Walter Orr Roberts Lecturer in Interdisciplinary Sciences by the American Meteorological Society and a Thomson Reuters highly cited researcher. Dr. Wiedinmyer, thank you so much for joining us today. It's an honor.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
You've done a lot of work in interdisciplinary sciences, and I mean, really, there's been a lot of current events going on that are quite interesting, to say the least. To get started, I guess, could you provide us, like a background or an overview of the recent Canadian wildfires and their impact on air quality?
Yes, so the Canadian forests have been very hot and dry this spring. I don't know if you've looked at the temperatures across the Pacific Northwest and a lot of Canada, but it's been extremely hot, very, very different than normal times, which causes the vegetation to dry out. And as a result of both natural and human causes, there's been a lot of fires going off. And when you have a lot of vegetation and these dense forests that are given ignition source, they can burn. And once they get going, they burn a lot because there's so many fires and that they're so big. And a lot of them are in remote areas. They are managed, but maybe not suppressed, just due to resources and because a lot of these natural ecosystems require fire to burn. And when you're burning a bunch of forest, as well as peat and things that are in the ground, you get a lot of smoke. And smoke is a lot of different things. It's the particles that you see. That's a lot of what we consider smoke, but there's a lot of other gases that are emitted, like greenhouse gases, carbon monoxide and methane, as well as reactive gases or these volatile organic compounds, all of which have different impacts in the atmosphere. But due to our weather patterns, particularly where the jet stream has been going, those particles, the fires loft them high into the air, and then they can catch different wind systems that can bring them very far distances, as many of us who are on the East Coast a week ago were exposed to. And so that smoke can impact air quality, close to the fires as well as hundreds and even thousands of miles away. The thing that we most track with regard to air quality are those particles. We know that particles can get inhaled in our nose and in our lungs and cause a whole host of health problems, from respiratory and diseases, enhanced asthma problems, as well as cardiovascular problems. Those high concentrations of particles have been related to premature death and other health problems. So even when you're hundreds of miles away, if that smoke gets down to the ground where we can breathe it, it can cause all sorts of health problems.
Yeah, no, I definitely want to go into that kind of like public health issue that this is totally, it's like a big risk that it's posing. And also, I guess, like about the sources of this. So I guess that's kind of where we could start. So what is, I guess, causing the wildfires in Canada? You said that, I mean, this is kind of like combination of natural and anthropogenic causes. And I guess, how do these emissions, I guess, compare to other anthropogenic sources of air pollution?
Yeah, well, again, the vegetation, the forests have been really dry and hot. So, someone throwing a cigarette butt out the window, campfire, if you have high winds, you can get power lines down. Those can all cause fires, as well as lightning. So again, once they get ignited, the fires can burn. And once they get going, that smoke, again, the hotter the fire, the higher the particles and those other smoke components can get lofted and then carry on in the winds. So anytime you burn, wood, any kind of time you have combustion, you can get particles, you can get other gases. In Canada, I haven't looked at it exactly, but I would expect that the emissions from these fires are dwarfing what's coming out of their anthropogenic sources. We have other sources of particles that contribute to air quality problems. You can think of, what comes out of the tailpipe, particularly of like diesel trucks. You see that black smoke, or power plants, industries, just driving around the cars kicks up particles into the atmosphere, agricultural sources. So there's a lot of sources of particles that can impact an area and the air quality in an area. But again, the amount of smoke that's been emitted from these fires and the amount of particles that have been emitted is very, very large. And I would expect, Canada is not a super populated country, and so they have a lot of emissions in their city centers, but on a nationwide basis, I would expect that the emissions coming from these wildfires is dwarfing what's coming out of these other sources.
Oh, wow, that's really interesting. I mean, the fact that obviously it has to do with like wind currents, and I do want to talk about, I guess, like transport of pollutants, because this is totally new science to me. But I'm from New Jersey, and the skies were like orange a week ago there.
Yes.
But now that I'm in like Iowa, I'm still feeling this kind of like smog everywhere. So I guess I wanted to ask, what are some of the key factors influencing the fate and transport of wildfire pollutants?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, it's where those fires are occurring. So the fires that impacted the air quality across the eastern United States and the eastern seaboard, a week or two ago, and actually I think it's still happening, just not at such a great extent. Those fires are actually located in Quebec. So the proximity of those fires to that location is number one. And then the second is the winds, right? You have winds high up and you have winds down low, and it's where those winds are going. The fires that are impacting more Iowa and central and the western United States, those are more in Alberta and British Columbia. So they're catching different winds than maybe the stuff that's coming in from Quebec. So again, where the particles go, where they impact, if they make it down to the ground, is a function of, where the fires are and where the smoke is, how hot and how much smoke is actually lofted, and then which winds it catches a ride on. So where the fire are happening in Alberta, I guess they're catching the jet stream and following it around. The other challenge is the weather systems will also control where the fires are going. And I had the opportunity to go to the Weather Service just actually in DC when the smoke was happening to learn more about what was going on. And I guess you had a big high pressure system kind of holding things in place above Canada and northern US, central US, and then you had this low off the East Coast, which was kind of funneling all the smoke from Quebec, like straight down over New York and Washington, D.C. and the East Coast. And so you just had, the climatic winds as well as the weather patterns that were pushing it all down. And what happened was it got better because that low lifted and the winds went more off the coast. But the fires are still going on. And if you look on the satellites right now, you can still see that there's smoke. It just happens to be higher up in the atmosphere. And so you might see a lot of haziness, but it is not reaching down to where we are. So again, like where the weather is and where the winds are will determine whether we're going to breathe it in or just be seeing it in the air, or if it's just not here ever, like at all.
Yeah, no, that's definitely like interesting in the fact of like where the smoke is like affects how obviously like we're gonna feel the impact of it, but like just because we're not actively breathing it in now doesn't mean it's still kind of like not, causing all sorts of damage up in the air. But I
Yeah.
mean, I do want to
And it
ask,
can impact the climate and the local weather patterns by changing the way that the sun comes through the atmosphere.
Yeah, that's something I didn't even think of. But that's a really That's also very concerning. Yeah, no, and the thing is, like, this season, it's being recognized as like the worst wildfire season in recorded Canadian history. And I
Yeah.
mean, this podcast is very central to climate, and I mean, this is as you mentioned at the beginning, it's coinciding with really record high temperatures. So I guess I want to establish, what do wildfires have to do with climate change, and in this context, how do you foresee the frequency and severity of wildfires evolving?
Yeah, well, I'll start with that second part first. We
Okay.
know, at least across the Western United States, looking back to the 1980s and even like earlier, we've seen longer wildfire seasons. We've seen more intense fires, more extreme fires, um, and more number of fires. And that's been attributed, one, to the fact that we have more fuels to burn. But two, it's been really tied back to our climate in general.
Mhm.
We know that particularly in the Western United States, the we've had it's been warmer, it's been hotter, it's been drier. The timing of the snow melt has gotten earlier. So these are all climate signals that really feed into the wildfire cycle.
Mhm.
When things are hot and dry, you can more readily burn them. When things are wet, they don't burn as nicely, of course. So that's really number one. But again, like that earlier snow melt runoff, if we have a warmer spring, the water runs off, it has time to dry out. It also, a lot of times when we have wet springs,
Mhm.
it enables a lot of fuels to grow up quickly. You think about all the grasses and understory fuels, and then if it dries out, you can have more fuel to burn and to feed more severe fires later on in the season. Um, I live in Colorado. I was actually, my neighborhood was burned as, in the
Mhm.
Marshall Fire in December, which is totally, unusual.
Mhm.
And again, these winds, a lot of the winds are driven by these high wind, or a lot of these fires are driven by these high wind events, again, which are occurring more frequently. And it's expected that it's been caused, those wind events have also been driven by climate changes.
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely increasing temperatures is doing all kinds of wacky things to like extreme weather events. So like,
Yeah.
and this is totally a part of that. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, and I do want to ask, like, so in terms of like how we, I guess, like address this issue, you've like researched the relationship between technology and this. So I guess, how can technology contribute to mitigating the emissions and air quality impacts of wildfires? And I guess, are there any innovative approaches or solutions that you'd like to highlight?
Well, I've been looking at a lot of one, there's two kind of pieces, the mitigation piece and the adaptation piece. And on the mitigation side of things, again, just in general, curbing our fossil fuel
Mm.
emissions. And understanding where, what we're emitting to the atmosphere and figuring out ways to shut it off. Because that's the number one driver for climate change, and climate change is driving, the more frequent, more extreme fire
Mhm.
seasons. Um, the other, piece that I've been looking at is, we know, the trajectory we're on and where we've been going is, there to curb fires right now, like to go in and do lots of prescribed burning or lots of thinning or managing our forests. Yes, I guess the fire thinning piece is really looking like it's not an effective way to manage the forests. And I think prescribed burning will be a necessary way to manage forests. But if you think about the amount of area that needs to be managed at this point across the Western United States, across Canada, it's huge, and it's
Mhm.
unrealistic to think that we could actually manage all of those forests. So we have to also look at ways to mitigate. There's, just really amazing technologies that go into fireproofing a home, making it,
Mhm.
both in materials as well as where, what the looks like on the landscape. And so I think it's going to be really critical for those who live in this wildland urban interface to implement those adaptation strategies to make the homes, stronger and more resistant to fires. And again, for those of us who are exposed to smoke on a regular basis, is to learn ways to protect ourselves, from inhaling that smoke, whether it's wearing masks. Again, I was in DC 2 weeks ago. I haven't seen that many masks since the first year of COVID. Having air filtration systems on our home, sealed up, houses, making sure that you're protecting yourself when levels are at, unhealthy levels.
Oh, no, that's a good point. I mean, it's like we have to stop it at the source, but also we have to deal with what we have. And in terms of like adapting, this is kind of like, it seems like it's only kind of get, I guess, like worse or more frequent. So, I mean, we might as well prepare ourselves.
That's right. We're on a trajectory, and we do have tools in our, available to us to help manage fires, and to manage our emissions to slow down climate change. But again, like what's realistic, we also need to consider those adaptations, and think about where we're living.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I mean, so in terms of like the work that you do, you also have explored like I guess also like policy responses to this, and that's kind of like I guess it could be mitigating or like related to adaptation. So I mean, there is sometimes like a disconnect between research and policy making. That's a whole other thing, but I guess like how can some of the findings from your research be translated into actionable recommendations for policymakers and stakeholders?
Yeah, I'm not sure my specific research is very, extremely valuable, but again, like, what we can show are trends and what's happening, and really come up with concrete ways to show why this is happening, so you can go in and then come up with policies. And then I think a lot of the really cool research is going on is to really look at the effectiveness of different management practices on fire frequency, fire severity, to help us best understand what are the most effective forest management strategies moving forward. There's a lot of really cool research in there to say this is going to work, this is not, right? And then I think, a lot with the air quality to date, when the US EPA regulates our air quality, right? So when a town or is exposed to, or an area has levels of air pollution higher than a certain threshold, then certain actions need to be put in place. Until now, wildfire smoke was considered an exceptional event, right? So if your levels in an area are above that threshold, but it's caused by a wildfire, it doesn't count as a negative towards your town. And so, yeah, so I think moving forward, we'll better, we can better say like, wildfires driving the air quality problems in these areas. It shouldn't be considered, how do we it's a challenge for air quality managers, because like, how do they stop smoke, hundreds of miles away, miles away. But at the same time, it's going to force some policy recommendations that are more regional and intercontinental and across countries as well. And this happens a lot in Southeast Asia. There's a lot of burning in Indonesia that creates smoke that impacts Thailand and Malaysia and other countries and Singapore. And so there's a lot of work going on to understand the causes of the fires, the drivers, the smoke, and to better control those so that they don't have such a widespread impact on the region.
Yeah, I mean, that's the tricky thing about air pollution. It's like it doesn't matter what you're emitting, like, or who is emitting. It's like that doesn't discriminate who, like, I guess whoever is impacted. It's not like just the people that are emitting, and that kind of is not just limited to like wildfire emissions, obviously. It's like everything.
Exactly. Yeah, it doesn't, air quality doesn't respect political boundaries. So
No.
yeah, it's a challenge. So, but better understanding the sources, the drivers can help develop more effective policies to mitigate and get rid of those emissions or the drivers of the air quality problems.
Yeah, no, I do also want to ask about, I mean, like the work that you do as both a researcher and associate director of science or for science. I mean, so I guess like, is there, what is it that you do? And also like, what is, I guess, maybe a favorite aspect of what you do?
Oh, I have the best job.
Really? Oh my
Yeah,
God.
so, I've been really fortunate to get to do amazing research with, I'm a very collaborative person. I've met just lovely people. I get to work with ecologists and
Mhm.
engineers and atmospheric chemists and physicists. And so I get to, interact with a whole, diverse community of scientific and engineering staff, researchers, students. And so, I really appreciate that. And, in my personal research, I get to pursue projects that I really think are meaningful and the outcomes can help drive policy, help be applied.
Mm.
A perfect example is in the response of the Marshall Fire, which swept through and burned about 1,100 homes in Superior and Louisville, Colorado in 2021. You know, I'm a homeowner here too, and I was fortunate enough to have my house still stand. But I had all my neighbors coming to me and they're like, "It smells really bad. Like, can I go in my
Mm.
home? What do we do? How do we clean?" And I didn't know the answers, but I know a lot of experts in the area, and we were
Oh,
actually
that's
able to come
amazing.
together and pull together resources for the community and actually come in and take measurements to figure out, how bad was the air? What did the dust on and all the smoke char on the houses, was that bad for you? What did cleaning do? Did it actually
Mm.
um, help clean up the air in the homes? So that was pretty exciting because we were able to provide really constructive, valuable information to help people feel more safe and understand what was going on in their homes. So that's me personally. And then in my position, I actually oversee the scientific endeavor of a 900-person research institute at the University of Colorado Boulder. And it's awesome because I get to learn and interact with people that are not only doing air quality and wildfire research, but people who are studying the ice caps in the poles and people who
Mm.
are mapping out the surface of the ocean and everything in between. And so I'm able to interact and understand and better and determine how I can best support that environment, those environmental science activities moving forward. So it's been really, really fun.
Yeah, no, that's really amazing that I mean, environmental science is like, it's quite a broad thing. Like you're exploring all
Oh,
sorts of environments. Like broad is an understatement. So, but I
yes.
mean, that in itself, it's like, I also love, I guess, like interdisciplinary stuff. So to be able to explore it, everything really is, it's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I honestly think, where we're going to have these breakthroughs is at the intersection of different scientific
Mm.
disciplines. I think that's where the exciting work is happening. I've had the fortune to work with like an environmental economist who looks at people's behavior, and that really impacts the exposures that people have from smoke and other air pollutants. And
Mhm.
so it's really important to have those interactions across disciplines to really understand a system and in my mind, come up with applications that will help benefit society.
Yeah, no, because I mean, society itself is an interdisciplinary thing. So yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I do want to ask also, this is, I guess, like we're going into the career advice section of the podcast. So, I mean, this is kind of a two-part question. If you could firstly turn back time, butterfly effects aside, what is some advice that you might give to the version of you who is at the start of your career? And then what advice would you then give to someone who wants to go into studying environmental sciences?
Yeah. One thing, just the opportunities are endless. The advice that I would give myself, I was always concerned that like, oh, I had to study this little piece. And, yeah, you get to study a piece and then you can go and do something else. you're never tied to, the where you are now. You can always change your situation. There's so many opportunities and so many places where you can apply your skills. And if one thing is not right, then go do something else. And that's something it's taken me a long time to learn, because I think certain expectations, particularly for PhD scientists, is that you take this like linear track, and
Yeah.
and that's not the case. You can always change, and if that is not, a situation is not working for you, then try something else. I mean, we're extremely fortunate to get to pursue science, and at all. I feel incredibly fortunate, and so yeah, and to get to pursue different paths, and especially now there's so many opportunities. I mean, it's just, I think it just, you look at what you're doing, from communications piece to, basic lab bench science, to getting out into the community and doing community science, to working for an insurance company or, a consulting firm. There's many, many opportunities, which is really exciting. So that's the advice that I would give to myself. And that's the advice that I give to a lot of people starting out in their careers is, try it. If you don't like it, try something new, and it's okay. There is no linear path, and people, and then the other thing is your career is going to kind of go up and down, right? You'll have these high points where you're just on fire and you're killing it, and other points where nothing gets done and you're just not in a good spot. And one, to enjoy the highs and appreciate them when you have them, and then two, give yourself some grace when, it's okay if you're in a low spot. You'll get that high spot again. I mean, so much happens in your life beyond your career that, many things are out of your control, and you have to, give yourself some grace when you're having the down times, and enjoy the high times, and make sure you celebrate when you have accomplishments.
Yeah, no, that's really valuable advice. I think I tend to also like have that notion of like I need to settle on this one thing and fully commit to it, when that's really kind of like damaging, because there's so many other things that you can totally go to at any time.
Yeah. Well, and if you like it, great, and stick to it.
Yeah,
Right?
no,
I thought I
true,
was in
true.
one position. I was there for 16 years. I thought I was going to be there for my whole career, and then it didn't work out, and I tried something new. And so, yeah, yeah, but it's okay. It's okay. And
Yeah.
what makes the best for you and makes the best for your career, and where are you happiest and best supported as well.
Mhm. Yeah, no, that's really good advice. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I guess to close off, I do want to ask, for those who want to, I don't know, keep up with your research or the work that you do, where can listeners find you?
So I'm at, you mentioned the Cooperative Institute for Research in Environmental Sciences. We have a website, it's CIRES at Colorado, and it's part of Colorado Boulder. So you can find me there. I also am at Twitter at CWIEDINM. It's my first initial and half of my last name, made it very difficult. Yeah, and I invite people, if they're interested, to reach out to me. I'm happy to follow up. I really enjoy talking to people about their interests and about how it might overlap with some of the things that I happen to know. Yeah, there's just really great work going on out there. So, yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much.